So, I recently finished my game, Launch My Dog. It's available on mobile. I've been working on the game for a year and a half, so I had some ideas piled up for what I could do next, and I want to push myself. Pokemon Balls was the first game I released. Launch My Dog was a small, polished experience that I'm very proud of. I've known for a while I don't want to do mobile development anymore. The development workflow is just clunky and tiring and tedious, so I want to make a PC game next. I've toyed around with FPS games in the past. There's the Field of Fire prototype that still haunts me on the Nerd Herd Network channel, and there's an FPS game I started making from scratch on this channel. And I want to make a first-person game, but not a shooter. The last thing I wanted to work on following Launch My Dog is replayability. Once you've 3-starred all the levels in Launch My Dog, there's really no reason to return to it. It's a 3-hour game, and that's it. The biggest thing that brings me back to a game is when my friends are playing the game, because I can have a fun time with friends for an afternoon or something. Here's the game idea, the elevator pitch. The first FPS game I played was Halo Reach, and me and my friends played a custom game mode called Castle Wars. And we played on a map which was basically just 2 castles and a bridge in the Forge world, and we could just play that for hours. And so I want to turn that into a fully fledged game. So it's called Castle Wars, or at least that is the running title. The first thing I did was write a design document. I put on a Queens of the Stone Age album, and then I wrote 14 pages with everything I could think of at the time. Okay, obviously I wrote for way longer than an hour, so there was also some Strokes, some Radiohead, Interpol, a little bit of Kanye. I just sat in bed and wrote for a day. I was going through like Unity assets that I had, and everything that I had to like use. What are my resources? What do I want to do? So the design document goes over things like the player character, environments, like what the maps are going to be like, how combat and movement's going to work, and how this game will be compared to and inspired from other games, as well as other things like menu flow, what multiplayer modes, what technologies are required to make this game work. But most importantly, the goal of a design document is to keep your project in scope. And I intend to work on this for a year and a half, kind of like Launch My Dog. And my perception of what like deserves to be in the game is going to change with Launch My Dog. Some things got cut out, some things got added in. So it's fluid, but it's not that fluid. It's a framework.
Come on, you got it.
Mike, this is
Nice.
Andrew.
This isn't good for my best and dice.
Wait,
Oh, no, I missed.
wait.
So my next step, which is somewhat easier, is coming up with a set of goals for the project. It's a short list. So number 1 is to use the universal render pipeline. Those with an astute eye would notice that Launch My Dog originally used the universal render pipeline, but then I downgraded it because the portal slicing shader that I stole from Sebastian Log was not written in the universal render pipeline. Goal number 2 is a sci-fi medieval art style, which is going to be generally low poly. The goal is to make it not realistic, because like if you look at Fortnite still looks good, but like realistic games from 2015 don't look as good as realistic games do now. And so that way I'm not like competing to keep the graphics great. Goal number 3 is smooth movement and combat. You should fight the enemies, not the controls. And I've been really spoiled with Destiny 2's movement and gunplay to the extent that like almost every single other shooter just feels clunky. Like Metro and Battlefield and even like CSGO just feel clunky to me. Goal number 4 is juice. Everything should be dynamic and animated and have sound effects, because I want this to feel like a game, not a simulation. This is something I didn't do perfectly on Launch My Dog. It feels very rigid and less flowy, less juicy. Goal number 5, better scripting. So I am a programmer at heart, and I want to become a better programmer through this project and every other project I do. Once you start having things, very overlappy kind of things. The scripts get very loaded very quick. So the goal is to split them up into smaller, more generalized components that you can put onto different things. That way I'm rewriting less code and things work better. So kind of like what I was talking about with generalized scripting, Launch My Dog had a launcher prefab, a bun prefab, and a dog prefab, and each one was so extensive that like one little tiny change would fuck the entire game up. Goal number 7 is inclusivity with character options. I want my players to feel comfortable with who they look like and sound like in the game. The game's going to take place in the future. The future I see, you can present however you want to present, and I'm willing to put in more time for people to feel comfortable playing my games. So these goals are like the learning outcomes of a college course. I'm gonna keep them in my mind during development, and I'm gonna stick to those core tenets. Not everything is going to be specifically as those goals are. They're guidelines.
Well, there's one.
Someone has to stay on the flag the whole time.
Oh,
Wait. Oh, I like our odds.
no, it's a puma.
Wheels!
So how exactly will I work on this project? I started using a sprint-based system for Launch My Dog. A sprint is roughly 2-ish weeks of work. The feel of the game should be better at the end of a sprint than it is at the beginning. I'll make a devlog for most sprints, but some of them are going to be kind of boring. I want to be able to market the game as before release, so that's why these devlogs are going to be here, and they're here to stay, because hopefully I can promote the game and like build an audience before it comes out. And I feel like Castle Wars is a much more marketable game than Launch My Dog. Nobody really wanted to watch videos about me making a hot dog physics game, but my FPS devlogs did miles better than anything else on my channel, and I never did anything to promote them. I wrote and recorded a few videos late in the summer, and they were about what I wanted to do moving forwards, and they were pretty nihilistic, to put it lightly. I felt that my work on Launch My Dog was kind of futile because there weren't that many people playing it, and I have no competence in marketing, so like money wise it didn't really do anything. Back to sprints. So I have to convert the design document into sprints. The last section of the design document is work progression, and it's basically the list of the general ideas of sprints. The first few sprints are 1, character controller and movement, 2 is basic combat, 3 is basic multiplayer, and 4 is a more full character controller. So basically like building up the basic systems. So there's a minimum viable product, and then I can test it and see if this is actually going to be a good idea to make.
Wait,
What is
hold
happening?
on, hold on.
So this devlog is on the first sprint. I worked on the character controller and forms of movement, and I started with a package off the asset store called Easy Character Movement 2, or ECM2 for short. I downloaded it and started learning how it handled character input and movement. I also had to learn how the new Unity input system worked. Luckily, ECM2 came with examples of different movement types, which I could compile into my custom character class. Player movement. So the first ability I added was the dash. The only issue is you could just kind of keep dashing forever. So I added a cooldown, and then you can also enable and disable the cooldown in the player component. If it's disabled, that just means you can't dash. And then I followed the ECM2 examples to add in double jump, slide, swimming, and ladders. Those were all relatively simple. I also needed a training map to help test all of this. So I built a simple running around and jumping area, and then added physics objects, ladders, fuck you destiny, portals, a kill plane, a swimming pool, health kits, a health pool. Or I added what was soon to be interactable health and damage cubes. Basically you would just interact with them, and you would either take health or take damage.
Charge. I mean, yeah, we couldn't hear you. That is true.
Oh no. Let them go first. Let them go first.
Here comes the cavalry.
Pod,
Oh,
John
my
tactics. Become a unit.
UI systems, or at least that is what this section is called. So I had to develop basic forms of 3 different systems in tandem, and those systems are interaction, health, and UI. You can't have an interactable health kit and a death cube without a way of graphically showing how the player will interact with it, because if not, like what do? You walk up to it, and then it looks like just any old object. But if you can tell the player to interact with it, then they'll interact with it. And then also you can't have a health kit, health system without a health bar. So the interaction system was pretty easy. So all you do is you periodically check what is in front of the player using a ray, and if the ray hits anything interactable, then it finds that interactable object, which contains information like what to do when you interact with the object, as well as what to tell the player to do, like press E to climb the ladder, something like that. Upon the actual interaction, it does the thing. So that's not too bad. The interactable is a parent class. You can derive it into many different classes and then change behavior. Basic UI was fun. I personally really like making UI. I know that's really boring, but it's true. I made a basic progress bar showing if you can use dash or not, and then it also gets toggled if dash is off. There's a panel showing how much oxygen you have left. More on that later. The bottom left panel will be for abilities. The bottom right is for weapons. These might get combined later, and then there's a dummy scoreboard up at the top and a health bar. Oh yes, the health system. So I made a parent class called health, which allows any object to interact with another's health amount through functions, as well as things like enabling and disabling health regeneration, and if the object with health dies. The player's health class controls the values for the health bar. The health bar fades out at full health after like 2 seconds, and it only shows if you have less than full health, and it turns more and more red. From like it starts turning red at 40% of your health, and then gets more and more red as you get to 0.
So anything beyond that, like a fucking.
This is so sad. Alexa, play the Warthog.
Oh no!
I'm going then. I'm going for the back.
Next is the fleet of systems that run the game rather than systems that let you view character statistics. The biggest system is death management. This consists of a script that manages the active character, when it dies, and when to respawn it. It also handles disabling input on the character that died and enabling it on the new character, because what it does is it takes out the object and puts in a new one. Or there's a map camera that gets shown when the player dies, and a little respawn UI to let the player know when they'll be able to respawn. So currently, you can die to the death cube, the kill plane, fall damage, and drowning. Respawning is tiered, meaning that there's a waiting period, an optional respawn period, and a forced respawn timer. All of this is configurable. It's tiered so that whatever game modes I make, I can customize the respawn timers for. Speaking of game settings, we're gonna need something to manage them. This object, the game settings object, holds the settings and can be referenced when needed. I want it to use Unity's scriptable object system, but I also want players to be able to configure the game when they create a room. And I don't know exactly how the scriptable object system works yet because I haven't used it before. So I'm hesitant. The next set of systems I added in was spawn points. I used to use UFPS for like the Field of Fire prototype. Their spawn point system had this like in editor, like in the scene view component that visually depicted where the spawn points were, where it was looking, or where they were looking, and what teams could spawn there. So I learned a bit about how to use gizmos in the Unity editor, and then I achieved this little effect. The only parameter for spawn points is the team that can use them, and then you can control the position and the rotation with the Unity controls. The Death Manager currently finds all the available spawn points, sorts them with just what team the player is on, and then tries to spawn them. Later I'll add in other means of sorting spawn points so that you can have like spawn camping protection. So I said I'd talk more about swimming. When you're in the water, you have an oxygen bar and it depletes after some time. With no oxygen, you take damage every second until you die. Surfacing refills your entire oxygen bar though. I also wanted to convey when the player takes damage in some way other than the health bar. So I added this little colored vignette effect that fades in and out when the player takes damage. It's red for damage, but it also turns green when you gain health and blue when you're underwater. There's definitely better ways of doing this, and I'll fix it in the future, but this way it's just a little simple indication system.
It's fine. I got you.
Oh, that lunge. Shit, I don't care.
Wait, hold on. Let me see if I can get this right.
Environment. Interaction. Now that there's a few systems, we need some small things that'll like populate the map so it's a little more interesting. I wanted to add man cannons, but it looks like a lot of work and I'm lazy, so they're being tabled right now. There's portals. Well, they're more teleporters. They get you from point A to point B, but they're not fancy. They were baked into the Easy Character Movement 2 package, so they're not the greatest, but they work pretty good. There's ladders, also baked into ECM2. They aren't the greatest. The ladder script was meant for a third-person game, so the walk forward control goes up and the walk backward control goes down even when you're looking in the other way. Popping on and off the ladders is kind of weird. Sometimes you spawn facing the wrong direction. I sort of integrated ladders into the interactable system, but the interact range and the ladder actual range of grabbing onto it is different. So I need to get those more aligned so that the message shows when it's actually in range rather than a lot closer. There are physics objects in this section of the map, but they jitter for me. I don't know if that's because they update in 60 Hz and I have a 144 Hz monitor. If so, untying physics from a fixed update is gonna be kinda rough.
Okay.
Hey, I might need assistance.
Assistance is here.
I don't think assistants ever showed up.
No.
Sounds. So now it is time to add in sound. This game, so far, really fun to control, but there's no juice, which means that the game doesn't feel very alive. Sound is the easiest way to make a game feel better. I do this with video transitions, kind of like this. So sound falls into a few categories. There's sounds produced by the character, sounds produced by the environment, and then there are sound systems that produce and or modify existing sounds for the player. So I'm gonna sort it into these three categories. When it comes to player produced sounds, there's a few issues: voice acting and gender presentation. So I don't want the players to speak words, that way I don't really have to deal with voice actors. And when it comes to gender presentation, I want to be as inclusive as I can. I got a Humble bundle and it had this Unity package called Human Vocal Sounds. It has many quote unquote male and female vocal sounds, and I want the player to be able to choose like a vocal presentation. The vocal presentation doesn't have to align with appearance. You can choose it to be masculine or feminine so far. And I want to have a non-binary vocal presentation, but I don't know what a non-binary vocal presentation would sound like exactly. If you have a reference point or want to create one for me, that would be appreciated. Drop a comment or something. The Human Vocal Sounds pack had no talking, but it has stuff like thinking, breathing, jumping, sighing, grunting, putting effort into things. I'm using these as a basis for most of the character produced sounds. The list of character produced sounds is as follows: thinking, light breathing, heavy breathing, taking damage, grunting, sighing for gaining health, bones breaking for fall damage because those were in the extras, dashing, jumping, double jumping, as well as fabric shuffling when you crouch. I did not add any environmentally produced sounds at the moment, except for like water, but I'll get to that later. This is all in a testing environment. I am making lists of placeholders and what I still need for things like sounds, animations, UI components, etc.
How that work? I have no idea.
Body.
Audio systems. Of the three categories, this one's getting its own video section because the last thing I did in the sprint was come up with some audio systems. So these can produce or modify sounds that the player experiences, and these systems make it feel like you're moving through the world. So the first system that I made was falling wind noise. If the player is falling, the wind noise slowly fades in, which is like if you were falling in real life, you get air pushing past your ears. Then there's a low health system that fades in and out a heartbeat. If the health is under 40% of the maximum, then a slow heartbeat is played, and if it's under 20% of the maximum, a fast heartbeat is played. This, I feel like, adds tension in the low end because the heartbeat is very bassy, and it further emphasizes the need for you to get some health. I wanted there to be a health regen tone akin to like the Halo 2 health regen sound effect. So I wrote this procedural audio script, which it kind of acts like a mini synthesizer. It makes the sound of a specific frequency, and then I just control the frequency and the gain from script. There's also settings for low and high cutoffs, noise, and offsets. I really want to do more with this in the future because it's like having a synthesizer without having a synthesizer. All of the sounds are just prefabs that get deleted when they run out, except for these sound effects, which get modified and they're physically attached to the player in the prefab. I wanted to add muffling. I added a low pass filter to every single sound effect in the game, and then when the player gets in the water, it finds all the currently active sounds and sets a low pass filter at 1000 hertz or 1 kilohertz, then resets the low pass filter to the maximum value, which just means that there's no low pass filter on it when the player leaves the water. There's also a sound effect for getting into and out of the water, and I have a short ambient loop that plays when the player is underwater that sounds like water brushing past the player. I tabled player movement sounds until later, since I want to commit time to a proper footstep system in sync with the animations and that change according to whatever surface the player's walking on. That system would also include sliding sounds and landing from jumps. Also, the player mouth makes sounds when you're moving. Things like breathing from walking or like heavy breathing from sprinting aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sound does sometimes just break.
Jake?
Go.
So what is next? Combat. So I have to make swords and like very basic abilities and then hook all that up to the health system. Yeah. So this is gonna be a long ass devlog, and so is the next one. Also, yeah, hopefully the thing I need to record later I can actually record, but bye.